Hello and welcome to another episode of Cognitive Dissidence with me, Niall Murphy, and here I am recording this on October the 18th, 2025. And I've left a bit of a longer gap than I usually would have done while making these videos. I haven't been feeling that good this last week or two. It all started with, well, how can I say? It all started with a spate of earthquakes. No, well, you can see nothing fell down, so don't you worry about that. But in the greater area, outside this area, there was, I think, 7+ on the Richter scale earthquakes that were listed about 200 miles away from where I am at the moment. And one of the things I didn't expect to have happen is that this would affect my inner ear and I would get a weird sense of imbalance. Now, of course, I had some sort of syndrome to do with that, but I also got ill. I ended up with like an ear infection, and the whole ear, nose and throat thing, and cough and cold, that sort of thing, and it sort of lingered. Nothing too bad, but it lingered for quite a while. And I wonder if, of course, whether this sort of inner ear imbalance syndrome brought on by the feeling of everything shaking is a thing. You know, because no one told me about this. Coming from one of the most seismically inactive parts of the world, the UK, no one told me about this. No one knew everything I needed to know about earthquakes before I came here, you know. But no one told me about that inner ear imbalance thing. That's fucking weird, I tell you. Right, anyway, enough of my, what I call it, my Pacific Ring of Fire seismic problems. Certainly puts it into perspective though. What I would like to talk about today is how, in my observations, it appears that Tommy Robinson is putting up a brilliant mirror to the Western narrative, you know, at least in its present form, the present sort of propaganda regime narrative that the West is under the spell of at the moment. And it's made me completely rethink everything. It's like this is more revelations of how I think that my entire political model that I seem to have picked up over the years of being alive has turned out to be a complete lie. Yeah, all this stuff about left and right, all this stuff about communist and fascist and everything in between, I've ended up coming to the conclusion that this whole thing is a total and utter lie. That all that there really has been is what I would call individualists, sovereigntists on one side, and statists and collectivists on the other. And what I think has been going on is that as the 19th century was a century very much of the individual, where there were a lot more individual freedoms, and in the 20th century they certainly were too, but they were beginning to be nibbled at in certain parts of the world faster than others. The West was a place where statism was coming in more slowly, but it had really taken over, like Nazi Germany. It had taken over the communist parts of the world, the old Eastern Bloc, whereas the state was beginning to make what you call it small Fabian society moves in the Western world. But the problem is, of course, is that, like, rather than it being presented as like the individualist, sovereigntist way over here and the statist and collectivist way over there, we were told about left and right. And you know, in recent years, the terms left and right seem to have decoupled from their original meanings. And the original meanings, of course, was, I think it was in France, was it? Is it pre-revolutionary France? There's a parliament there, and of course, what they would do in this parliament is that there was the leader on one side of the president, I think, or no, prime minister, whoever it was, were on his left side was all the people who were in the trade unionists and, you know, helping out the workers, and on the other side, on the right-hand side of him, he would have the people who were pro the royals, aristocrats, that sort of thing. And then this left and right model, which was loosely based on pre-revolutionary France, then became something new, a way of very vague, nebulous way of describing politicians and politics as we know it now. And there are so many holes in this now that I don't believe it anymore. And I'll give you a good example. Recently, Tommy Robinson, who has been, how could I say, he's been in court for so many trumped-up charges. It kind of makes the state look really corrupt at this point, you know. I mean, you know, you can't sell me the idea anymore that Tommy Robinson's a criminal or a thug or a far-right racist or any of these things. You can't sell me the idea anymore that he is any of these things, because look, all you can sell me is that he's an enemy of the state in a way that Emmanuel Goldstein in 1984 was an enemy of the state. He's a manufactured Emmanuel Goldstein character. That's what I kind of think of him as being. Now, of course, you know, it's hard to know in this world whose intentions are sort of like benign or malevolent. It's hard to know. But from what I can make out on my observations, when I see that he's been, you know, how can I say, arrested on trumped up charges that don't really have any meaning and banged up and put in prison so many times on things that really he did not deserve, things that are just so preposterous, it kind of, that if these rules were applied to everyone in the whole of Britain, it would just appear that there is no such a thing as a rule of law. That, you know, that basically Britain is a completely legally, morally bankrupt country altogether. If you were to apply those rules and that type of policing that has been performed on Tommy Robinson to everyone in the UK, no one would want to live there. I mean, it would be like North Korea. It would be a complete pariah hermit state. So the way he has been singled out and treated is clear to me that the state, if I was going to say, you know, who's the bigger villain, the state seems to be the bigger villain than, you know, than the person who's been arrested in a case like this. I mean, when you think that, yeah, he got arrested for the previous year's United Kingdom rally for playing a video that he was told not to play under contempt of court rules. So he played it, and well, when he played the video, as far as he was concerned, he felt that this video was very important to be seen by as many people as possible. It got to be seen by more than 100 million people worldwide, and then in the end he decided, okay, enough people have seen it, I'm going to let go of that video. In the end, that's how that was the conclusion that he came to. But the thing is, when he was put in prison in solitary confinement for ages in a category B prison, and the reason why he was in solitary confinement was because everyone that the prison staff were protecting him for in the solitary parts of the prison wanted to kill him. If it was just a civil offence, well, why didn't they just put him in a minimum security open prison with none of these lifers and none of these violent thugs in there? Why didn't they do that? I mean, Tommy Robinson has a history of coming back to the UK from his time abroad in time to go to court to face trials. You can absolutely guarantee that he does that. He always does. And then he sits the trials and he pleads guilty for what he's guilty for, and he pleads not guilty for what he's not guilty for. They just decide, oh, screw the law, throw the book at him anyway, and then he comes out and they seem to be making him stronger. And now what's happened is, very recently, just before he went to Israel, he was in Westminster Magistrates Court. No jury, of course. No. Was he promised a jury for this one? And then ended up not getting one? Whatever happened. The BBC and mainstream journalists were invited in with their phones and with access to the internet. But citizen journalists were told they were not allowed to because they weren't accredited enough. Israel Levant from Rebel News in Canada managed to convince the judge on the second day that he was accredited enough. And the judge said, okay, you can come in there. But then he was frog-marched out by other people when the judge was not there, right? Because the BBC reported on him. So there's a clear, well, two-tier everything in the UK, but definitely two-tier journalism going on there, without the shadow of a doubt. They were trying to make it that the mainstream media only have all decided that Tommy Robinson's a Emmanuel Goldstein type, and that there's this narrative they must build and you must not deviate from that narrative, whatever you do. They're the only people that be allowed in the court to report on it properly, right? And what happened? Well, he was, after being released, no, I actually don't know when this was. Was it before he went into prison? Was it before he went into prison last time? When they decided to arrest him for pick him up at the border, arrest him under the Terrorism Act. That was it. Yeah, they arrested him under the Terrorism Act, They didn't really have any reason to. He was driving a Bentley, a mate's Bentley. Well, it was very easy to prove that his friend said, here's my car, you can borrow it. And then of course, well, provided that his name was on the insurance documents, then he wouldn't have broken any laws, so no law broken then. They were saying that it was a problem that he was driving in a Bentley and claiming that he wanted to go all the way to Benidorm in it because it's such a long drive. And also, they were also saying the fact that he had, I think it was something like about between 10 and 13,000 pounds in cash on him. Well, he can't put his money in the bank, you see, because they've debanked him. In their attempts and their endeavours to make him persona non grata, in which case they have not been able to take his career away, they've not been able to take his fame and notoriety away, nor are they able to stop him being an activist. He's still able to earn a living, and in the process of doing that, he just can't use banks to the same degree. Well, he wasn't planning on, and I don't think he ever is planning on blowing anyone up, right? This is the thing. But they even said to him, one of the coppers even said to him, we know you're not a terrorist, we're just arresting you under this act anyway. They were very barefaced about it. They just wanted to get into his phone. They wanted his PIN number because they wanted access to some journalistic sources, and he didn't want to share this with the police. I mean, in a world of whistleblowers, I don't see what's wrong with that. But they arrested him under an act that Tony Blair had brought in a few years back that was designed to take your right of silence away. Well, this was supposed to have been used on like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and all the people who were supposed to be blowing us up. It was not supposed to be turned around and used on, well, how can I say, citizens for whom you do not actually find enough evidence really are the far right. Let's put it like that. It was not supposed to be used on them. And then of course, well, you know, one of his arguments that was used in court by a KC, paid for by Elon Musk, is that how can these, you know, these inept, not very experienced police officers, well, if they think he's far right, well, how come MI5 doesn't consider him to be this sort of political threat or terrorist or whatever, right? And because they don't. And this is the thing. So these were all trumped up. This is lawfare. This is more of the process being the punishment. But despite the fact that this trial at least is over for now, it's not over for now. After 2 days in a magistrate's court, they just decided to adjourn the trial and to put him, you know, just on a temporary adjournment. He has to come back on November the 4th. Right, so if November the 4th is when it continues, if they haven't decided whether he's guilty or not guilty of being a terrorist yet, how come they've let him out of the country to go on a government-sponsored visit to Israel then, if he's a terrorist? I mean, this is insulting to my intelligence at this point. Anyway, he goes to Israel. He's hanging out with Avi Yemeni from the Australian, I think he's the Australian, Jewish Australian member of the Canadian, news outlet Rebel News. They're sort of side by side for most of this, reporting together. And Tommy Robinson's a guest of honour from one of the politicians out of the Knesset. Now, whatever you think about, you know, the Netanyahu administration, whatever you think of the, you know, whatever you think of Zionism, whatever you think of the Knesset itself, Mossad, the IDF, any of these things, right? I'd ask you to switch off your internal dialogue. I want to focus, laser focus, on specific items here. Elon Musk is now apparently a bloody, you know, when I say, a full-on jackboot wearing, funny moustache worshipping, Nazi saluting, you know, goose-stepping fascist Nazi now apparently, despite the fact that all the people who call him that are all happy to use his social media platform X. Yeah. Right, there's that. Why don't they just boycott it? Why don't they just not use it? You know, I suppose that must make me one, because I'm using Starlink. I haven't any choice. I have to use Starlink out here because the internet infrastructure is not built in a way that if they haven't got an internet box or a Wi-Fi box available in the house that you're in, the only way you can get online is either by using a signal booster and 5G or by using Starlink, and that's it, right? And Starlink is just a bit kind of better because it's more proper Wi-Fi. So, you know, that's the thing. However, nevertheless, right, if Elon Musk now is a Nazi who's funding Tommy Robinson's defence in court, and if Tommy Robinson's a Nazi, I thought the Nazis killed the Jews. I didn't think that they were supporters of Israel. I thought they would have been the antithesis of that. The people that we're being told are right-wing Nazi fascists are all supporters of the people who the Nazis historically killed. Is this like, you know, first we're at war, Oceania's at war with Eurasia. Oh no, now we're at war with East Asia. We've never been at war with Eurasia. Is this some type of, you know, changing history, historical revision? Are we now are they now, the next thing they're going to do is try to tell us that it wasn't the Jews that were killed in Auschwitz? Are they going to somehow tell us it was the Muslims that done this as we go into the future? It does make you wonder, doesn't it? Because this is extremely insulting that they've put this sort of doublethink into people's brains. You know, there'll be people who are on the right who will write Tommy Robinson off now and say, oh, he's a Zionist shill. There'll be people on the left as well, as you know, who say, but who will have to struggle with the cognitive dissonance of being able to say that on one hand he's a Zionist shill, but on the other hand he's supposed to be a far-right Nazi. How they'll be able to marry those two things together, I have no idea whatsoever. But the fact is that the government have taken his side over there. He's considered to be a friend of the state there, an enemy of the state in the UK. And the UK is trying to pretend it's not anti-Semitic. It's even the what is it? Is it the Home Office now have come up with a new slogan with a font and all of that about how they're going to protect Jews in the UK now. But the thing is, right, after the Jews got blown up in a synagogue in Manchester only a little while back, and they did nothing to stop the pro-Palestine marches, which we know are anti-Israel marches, really, right? After all that, and then Aston Villa were playing a Tel Aviv football team while the Jewish fans were not allowed to go into the stadium. The thing is, I mean, look, this could all be distraction. It could all be look the other way stuff. It could all be theatrics if you were to have the David Icke view of the world, right? But generally speaking, it is not a good look for the UK, because people who are going to be reading in between the lines and not just accepting the general sort of consensus reality are going to be looking and thinking, hang on a minute, how can you say that you are anti-fascist when you are being anti-Semitic? And how can you even say that Tommy Robinson is a fascist or a Nazi if he's pro the Jews? Didn't Hitler kill the Jews? Hang on a minute, there's a lot of contradictions here going on, are there not? And this is what I see. And I just hope that there's enough people out there that are asking these awkward questions, enough of people who are called the ones who see too much. Because, yeah, I mean, if I were to bring it all the way back to the, you know, the Fabians, like I was talking about in a previous video, or if I was to talk about, you know, the statists and all the different experiments and political experiments that they've tried over the years, I've eventually come to the conclusion that the Nazis were, as well as Mussolini and the Nazis, were part of the same socialist experiment that the Fabians are from, or that say that Stalin, or even you know, Maoist China was. But I kind of think that something went horribly wrong, and so they had to spin it so they could disassociate themselves from it afterwards, because it was one of their experiments that went horribly wrong. You see what I mean? Because you know, when it went a bit out of hand, and maybe Hitler went a bit rogue, and they did something that maybe they thought he shouldn't have done because it was a little bit against the script, which involved, you know, how can I say, the attempt to wipe out a race of people, exterminate a race of people, and they were probably thinking, no, this is actually going a little bit too far. But they wanted to, somehow, as time went on, what they really needed to do was to distance it ideologically, retrospectively, as we went into the future, from socialism. So the National Socialist Workers' Party of Germany, the Nazis. Funny how it has a name that sounds very similar to a party that George Galloway would actually be the head of, doesn't it? Or someone like that, or kind of what you would call a Citizen Smith type, for those of you who remember him, power to the people type. It's funny how it had a very, very similar name to that, and yet somehow they had to retrospectively make it far right. Now, of course, when you had the Ku Klux Klan in America, or when you had the skinheads in the UK, and when you had the football hooligans, what they really needed to do was to create a new archetype that was what you call far right, and somehow associate them with the Nazis, even though they looked and acted nothing like them. To say, right, these are the Nazis, these are the people that you don't want to be like. And all right, there were a few people who were like that. There was actually a bunch of people for a while that genuinely were far right, and yeah, of course they exist. I mean, no one denies that they exist. Of course they do, right? The proper, full-on ethno-nationalists, ethno-purists or whatever. But I've come to the conclusion that the regimes that we had, where they would try out a few different varieties of things, one had to be based on the workers, one had to be based on like the oppressor versus the oppressed, the other had to be the pure versus the impure. But there were a lot, I think, personally, of different socialist experiments that were done, experiments in totalitarianism that were done, that didn't quite work out the way they wanted to. But ultimately what they were trying to do is bring a statist world in, as opposed to an individualist or a sovereigntist world. And so what they will do is they'll take advantage of low IQs and short memories and people who don't see too much or don't see a lot, because they're the people who will just go along with everything, and they're the people who won't question it and say, hang on a minute, what about this discrepancy, that discrepancy, etc. Yes, Tommy Robinson used to be a football hooligan, but he doesn't really, he doesn't, match he doesn't really have the stereotype of your typical Nazi. Also, going all the way back to his 20s and all the videos that I've seen of him, going back to when he first turned up on the scene, I've never really heard him ever say anything bad or racist against black people or Hindus or Sikhs. So no, he doesn't match that archetype at all. But I think they needed to have him as an Emmanuel Goldstein character, and I think that's the type of person that they want him to be, because it's convenient for them to have that type of scapegoat. And because Elon Musk then decided to come out and say, okay, we're going to turn Twitter into X, it's now going to be a freedom of speech platform, they now had to tell us that he is a Nazi too, despite the fact that they can't stop using his platform, incidentally. Which, but then if you point out, well, just get rid of your X accounts then, and then you won't be complicit in fascism yourselves, and then watch them squirm and listen to them as they try to, obfuscate and, divert, yeah, that'd be interesting to hear how they do that, though, wouldn't it? Right. So, anyway, what I would like to do, before I go, I would like to say thanks to Thomas Sheridan. Right. Thanks to Thomas Sheridan for sharing my last video, because all of a sudden I think the last one got 1,000 views. The previous one to that had got less than 100. So thank you, Thomas, for sharing my video, and I hope that some of the new subscribers that Thomas Sheridan has brought along come back and watch this one. And yeah, for those of you who remember me of old, I would ask you also to share my video or tell your mates about my videos. Now, of course, I don't bother posting my videos on Facebook anymore or anything like that anymore. I'd rather that my videos, as they spread around. Now YouTube's a bit more relaxed and less bad than it was before, as we've gone into the post-woke world. I don't mind the idea of me just spreading word of mouth. I'm not someone who wants to be too much embedded into the social media world. I don't really want that type of fame or notoriety in social media generally, but I just make YouTube videos, and what I do is I hope that people will share them with their friends or tell their friends about them or whatever, you know. But I'd like it to be spread organically. Be better if that happens, I think. Anyway, enough of my yakking. I shall leave you to it. See you later, alligator. See you soon, baboon.